Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier, and in this presentation I'm looking at the development of Mao's tactics at Jiangxi. This is how the communists survived and rebuilt, and if they hadn't been able to do this, they couldn't have won the Civil War. So it's very, very important. Whilst Mao identified at Jiangxi flexible guerrilla tactics as the best way to fight the Kuomintang, he was also adamant that establishing a strong rural base from which the revolution could be consolidated in as wide an area as possible had to be the priority. And this is what he established at Jiangxi in southeast China. This meant keeping the army together, not dispersing it as widely as possible so as to reach as many communities as possible in order to assist local insurrections, which is what the leadership in Shanghai favoured. Li Lisan, who backed by Moscow had emerged as the dominant figure in the CCP's leadership in the summer of 1928, called for major cities to be targeted, so long as the masses could be aroused and victory was likely. Mao could accept this, so long as he would decide whether victory was likely. He wouldn't risk his troops otherwise. But when Li called for an attack on Wuhan, with preliminary attacks on a number of cities on its approach, both Mao and Zhou thought the cities couldn't be taken, and only made a half-hearted contribution to the campaign, which failed, and Moscow ousted Li from power. The party was still struggling to find the right direction to take. To what extent should they follow Comintern directives? To what degree should they be independent of the Comintern? Could, or even should, the party's activists be controlled from Shanghai? Or should they leave decisions to the leaders operating on the ground, scattered around China's provinces? Should it better coordinate its army, or continue to operate as largely independent and uncoordinated forces? Should it focus on the cities or on the countryside, the proletariat or the peasantry? These are critically important questions. Mao was already convinced that he was involved in a nationalist enterprise first, though one with a clear socialist bent. The nationalism, just as much as the socialism, was specific to China. China's history, China's traditions, China's circumstance, even China's geography. Meanwhile, in the winter of 1930, Chiang Kai-shek set out to destroy Mao's base for good, deploying 100,000 men in the first of a series of encircling campaigns, designed to squeeze the life out of the Soviet. He had a force 4 times larger than that deployed in 1928 that forced Mao out of his base at Jiangxi. It was by far the biggest threat Mao had faced, but his forces were better prepared than they had ever been. The army that had left Jiangxi numbered little more than 4,000, and 20% of them had been lost in the desperate flight. They were also very poorly equipped. Only half had guns. The force now at Mao's disposal numbered 40,000 and were equipped with modern rifles. They were motivated, disciplined, and well-trained. They were experienced too. Reconnaissance, map-making and intelligence, transportation of supplies, field kitchens and first aid stations were all an integral part of Mao's force. Marching plans, arrangements for river crossings, battle plans were all in place, and they had field telephones to aid communication. It may still have been mostly made up of illiterate peasants, but it was a professional army for all that. It would, however, be outgunned. It had some captured machine guns and mortars, but it had insufficient ordnance and no artillery. To combat Chiang's superior forces, Mao adopted his guerrilla tactics with luring the enemy in deep. The plan was to lure the enemy deep into the communists' base area, and when they were exhausted, annihilate them. We have to remember this base was over 30,000 square kilometres. That's 12,000 square miles, with a population of more than 3 million. And Mao's plan worked. Though the Kuomintang forces were not annihilated, they were defeated, and 12,000 prisoners were taken, 5,000 rifles, and 30 machine guns, and Mao's greatest prize, more radio sets. However, it came at a price, as those villages that were left defenceless as the nationalists advanced and the communists retreated suffered horrendously. Possessions were taken or else destroyed, houses burnt to the ground, women raped, and children and old people butchered. A second encirclement campaign in April 1931, this time with 200,000 troops, met the same fate, though as a result of different and largely improvised tactics. In the first battle alone, 4,000 prisoners were taken, a further 5,000 rifles, 50 machine guns, 20 mortars, and an entire signals unit, operators as well as equipment. By the time the campaign was over, 30,000 nationalist troops had been taken and 20,000 rifles captured. What was also significant was that Mao called for the communists to make a stand rather than withdrawing from the area. Jiangxi was to be their base for so long as they could hold it. However, Chiang returned just 2 months later, taking personal command of a force 300,000 strong. The speed with which this third campaign was organised took Mao by surprise. Banking on it taking Chiang longer, he had dispersed his forces across the breadth of the region in order to draw up support, raise funds, and secure supplies. Learning from mistakes, the nationalists moved slowly, consolidating gains by building defences and ensuring no part of the army was left isolated and so vulnerable to a communist attack. The nationalists were again brutal in their treatment of civilians, and villages were left destroyed, men, women and children butchered again. The communists improvised in a desperate campaign that only just saw them able to slip away into the mountains and avoid annihilation. They were also fortunate in that the nationalists from the right, along with local warlords, had initiated their own campaign against Chiang, forcing him to abandon the fight against the communists. Still, though they had suffered heavy losses themselves, 30,000 nationalists were either killed, wounded or captured, and the communists were still left in control of an area with a population of 2 million people. But the party leadership still didn't trust Mao, even though his strategy had been vindicated and it was being actively supported by the Comintern. The importance of the Red Army, the preference for guerrilla warfare, and the primacy of the struggle in the countryside were all now accepted. But things were about to radically change at Jiangxi when it became home to the CCP's leadership, and too because Japan invaded Manchuria in September 1931. But that's for another presentation. I hope you found this one interesting and useful. The key things to take away from it is the proven value of a strong rural base and Mao's tactics of defending that base by luring the enemy in deep. Now, don't forget that if you're interested in tutorials, you can see if I have a slot free. Just get your parents to get in touch with me at historymadeeasier@gmail.com and we'll see if we can work something out. But for now, let me thank you, as I hope I always do, for listening, and wish you the very best of luck in your studies. Cheers.